Welcome. I'm so glad you guys can be here and we can have a time to talk with our composer that we are featuring and highlighting next week, Anna Clyne. We have sort of known each other a little bit through different means, and we played some of your pieces, especially the Within Her Arms. And we've always been wanting to have a premiere of yours, and we are thrilled that it can be in this auspicious year of many auspiciousnesses happening this year. But I cannot wait to kind of talk to you about this. We are the US premiere of the piece Stride, but this next week, the Australian Chamber Orchestra will be premiering it worldwide, and then ours will be live streamed. So Australian Chamber Orchestra can still tune in and hear our version of it too. So Anna, welcome. I would just love to welcome you and just maybe say hi and talk a little bit about, you know, your life as a composer slightly, and then we'll dig into the piece.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here, and thank you for commissioning Stride. And yeah, it's nice to be building on a relationship of you having already performed some of my music. So that's been really great, especially Within Her Arms, which is a string piece. So to have heard that and be able to, you know, write with you in mind for Stride. A bit about, as you can probably hear, I'm from England, but I live in New York, in upstate New York in the Hudson Valley, which is very beautiful right now. For the leaves have fallen and it's actually a very beautiful sunny day. But I studied at Edinburgh University. I did an undergrad in a music degree, so a bit of everything. I played the cello, harmony, counterpoint, music education, music technology. And then I focused on composition at the Manhattan School of Music, where I completed a Master of Music degree, studying with Julia Wolfe, who's one of the founding members of Bang on a Can. And then I've been in the States ever since. So almost 20 years I've been in America.
Oh, that's great. Well, again, we're thrilled. What I love about so much of what you do is you integrate, you don't consider music just its own isolated field. I think that's what's so wonderful. I feel like you speak in so many different artistic languages, and that's what attracted me to you in the first place years and years ago when I practically accosted you at the League of American Orchestras one time. But yes, would you just tell us a little bit about Stride? And I know we're going to get into the nitty gritty. We're going to have questions. I hope people can do some chat and ask questions, but tell me a little bit about the impetus behind that.
Sure. So as you mentioned, it's a co-commission between the Scottish Chamber Orchestra and Australian Chamber Orchestra, and their concert is focusing on the 250th anniversary of Beethoven's birth. So they asked me to find a piece of Beethoven's to respond to. And I don't know why, but the piece that popped into my head first was Beethoven's Sonata Pathetique in C minor, very well-known piece. And something that I've always loved about that piece is after the introductory motif, he has these octave leaps in the left hand that sort of a walking bass, but in octaves. That sort of is almost like stride piano, and it really drives the music. So I was just thinking of stride piano, and I wanted to take that octave motif and use that as the starting point for my piece Stride, which is a 15-minute piece. It's actually in one movement, but I do take a sort of musical samples of the Beethoven in the chronological order of the actual piece. His piece is in 3 movements, and my piece is in 3 subsections. So each section explores a few cells from the Beethoven, be they rhythmic or harmonic or melodic.
That's great. Well, and it's interesting too that this concert that we're having is turned into a conductorless concert, which we've done many times, and we've done Schoenberg Chamber Symphony without a conductor, and we've got Andres Cardenas in the hot seat as the concertmaster. But I know that wasn't originally in the plan when you were constructing the piece, but I know that we all have the score. Even though I play the oboe, I am still looking at the score. But yeah, I know we're going to look forward to digging into this conductorless and really the intricacies of it. So do you want to take us into the piece a little bit about how it's set up and what it's for exactly with the strings? I know it's for string orchestra, but maybe you can explain the splits and all the things that you do in it.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, I'm a cellist, so I have a particular love of the strings and writing for the strings. So I was excited about this opportunity to write not for a string quartet, but to write for a string orchestra. And one of the great things about that as a sound world is you can, as you mentioned too, have divisi. So like half the violins could play one way and half the violins could play the same notes, but a slightly different way. So for example, if you're playing the violin near the bridge holds the strings up, and if you play nearer it, you get a sort of more glittery sound. You get to hear lots of overtones. So if you have that played simultaneously with someone playing on the fingerboard, like further away from the bridge, which has a more sort of flute-like sound. If you have those two colors together, you get like a new sound. So it's like kind of like painting. So I love that when you're working with sections of strings. So yeah, I mean, I could open up the score and show you some things with that.
That would be great. I would love to do that. I think that a lot of people don't realize that reading the score, I mean, for a conductor, you have to see so many parts at one time. But I think also for a really strong chamber orchestra or orchestra, you've got to know what's happening around you. It's not just your singular part. So please, let's see that.
Yeah, let's take a look. So let me just share my screen. Okay, do you see this?
Yes.
Great. So actually, this is the program note on the left here, and you'll see here the quotation from the 8 measures early on in the piece of the Pathétique. So here you see the, the pedal on the tonic here, and then gradually moving up. It's a simple device, but it's very.
You might scroll in just a little bit for us.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah.
Do you see that a little?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, there you go. So I can actually play that to you just so you can hear what that sounds like. This is the Beethoven. Let's see. So here we go. Great. Did you hear that? Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, it gives a real character, especially with those ascending chords and then coming back down. So just to show you in my piece, so here we go. Let me show single page. There we go. So this is the first page of stride. So it starts with a sort of slower gesture, which is actually derived from the very opening of the Pathétique. But then you'll see here we have this, again, this octave in the cello here, but with the basses playing just without the octaves, just the roots. And then here, this is the cello, the bass, and the violins are playing the offbeat. So they're kind of having that syncopation, but in a different way.
The beat is not quite as fast, right?
No, this is, the tempo is 112. Yeah. So I could share some MIDI. MIDI is a way to, basically there's several different notation programs. So there's Sibelius and Finale are probably the two main ones. I use Finale, and you can hear back the score. So it can be a really useful tool for composing. The sounds are very crude. So they basically give you a pitch and rhythm, but they don't give you any of the nuance of, obviously, of a musician. But I'd be happy to show you in the MIDI mock-up of my piece Stride what that sounds like.
Sure.
Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah, so you can hear how I set it up, and then I develop that later through the piece as well.
Nice. Definitely. And if you guys have questions, just let us know in the chat for sure. In the comment section. Definitely. So how long is the piece? Just let people know.
The piece is 12 minutes long. Yeah, yes. Although the MIDI says 12, probably by the time it's performed, it'll probably be more like 13 minutes.
Right.
So when it can breathe a bit more than the MIDI playback.
Well, and what's wonderful, I love the co-commissioning idea, because that means you're going to have 4 performances of this piece, and it's not a one and done. And with ROCO, everyone can live stream, and so you can see it and also have it for your website and have people just continue to listen to the piece. I love how with Derek Vermel, he wrote a piece that we did with New Century, and we did a couple of times, and I just love how it does morph. I mean, there might be something after you hear the premiere next week that you call me or Andres and say, hey, wait, let's tweak this. And that's what's exciting about the dynamic part of performing for a composer. I love that. That's why I love the new music, to be in dialogue and actually have that conversation and say, would you try this, or have you thought of this? And I love that. So I hope that you feel comfortable next Friday calling and saying, hey.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the really exciting things about new music, is it's really living and breathing. And you know, the fact that the composer is living and breathing. If it's, you know, if you're playing with a piece by Beethoven, you can't call him up and ask him, but you know, when we're still here to answer the questions, it's really fun. It's really a collaborative process, and especially when like your orchestra are very open to that dialogue, it's really, really exciting. And to know that you can change that, like you can offer feedback and we can change things as we go along, so it makes the piece stronger.
Well, I always say you can't Zoom with Beethoven, so and if you are, there's something going wrong there. But you know, I do think that that is probably the most fun that we've had, is that dialogue that's continual, and just inviting your creativity into what our space is, and the individualism, which is why I love that everybody has their own color to play, and it's not a conglomerate piece. So that's going to be great next year. Well, is there anything else that's specific, as far as that's something unique in the score besides those two things that they're playing in different parts of the strings that you wanted to share?
Sure. I also have sections where it's where there are just soloists playing, which is another thing you can do, is you have a string orchestra, but you can also make it more intimate. So you have moments that feature just individual instruments. And just a little bit about my background is I have worked a lot with electroacoustic music, which is a process of incorporating pre-recorded sounds or electronics with live instruments. And I had mentioned Finale and Sibelius are two very well-known notation programs. I also work in a program called Pro Tools, which is a sound editing software, which allows you to layer sounds and chop them up and reverse them and add delays and things. And I love working in that very tactile process with sound, but those same processes I find have transitioned very well to writing for the orchestra. So for me, that transition from electroacoustic music to orchestration has been very organic. So one of the things I like to do, for example, is to orchestrate reverberation. So you could have one instrument playing a melody, and then the other instrument sustaining notes from that melody. So like if you hear a melody in a big cathedral, for example, you hear the line, but you also hear that resonance. So things like that, when you have a string orchestra, you can literally orchestrate that resonance. So that's been something fun to do with this piece as well, in the more melodic sections.
That's great. And I think that's so interesting too, that you can never guarantee what acoustic the piece will be performed in, right? And we play in 12 different venues here on purpose, and it's wide variety. And you really do have to adjust your tapering. And of course, wind players love it when you don't have to do your own tapering of the note. But yeah, that's fascinating. Like the avo par style of just resonance. That's interesting. But yeah, would you show us a little bit more on the score? I think that's so fascinating to look.
Oh. Just share my screen 1 second.
Sure.
There we go. Do you see it again?
Yes.
Wait, let me see. Just flipping through to try and find it now.
No, I understand.
Actually, I don't think I do it so much in this piece, but this is an example of sort of deconstructing the ensemble. So here you see, like, this is a solo violin playing these notes, but then here they're sustained in the violas. So things kind of get stuck. So it's like adding layers. And so here are the violin too. So here we have a solo playing sol tasto, which means to play on the fingerboard. So it's that sort of flute-like sound. So it's more floating. And then down here, you see the cello is also solo. So whilst you've got these sort of resonant sustains in the violas here, and actually they're playing non-vibrato, which sometimes when you think of a string player, they can play with that beautiful, almost like an opera singer, sort of variation in the sound. But I specifically asked them here to start the note, like if I zoom in, can you see this? I don't know. Not quite. Let me try and zoom in. Is this?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So here it's like NV means non-vibrato, and then they slowly move to poco vibrato and then fade away to non-vibrato. So it's a way to use vibrato to accentuate the dynamic contour as well. So it starts very pure, like old music, and gets a bit of color and then fades away. So these little details I often put in my score. And then moving up here is the violin solo, which is also doing the same thing, starts non-vibrato. So it's a very dry sound. And then just these octaves that we spoke about earlier from the very opening of the Beethoven, and here sort of echoed in a solo, also solo in the cello, but you still have this sort of resonant reverby sounds in the other layers. So as I was saying, it's like that process of adding layers and being very particular about how the sounds are played, like if it's near the bridge or on the fingerboard or with vibrato or just a little bit of vibrato.
Nice. Well, and I did notice that in the score that there are a lot of details, which is, I think, a really great way that composers have moved toward just really showing exactly what they want to have happen. Yeah, I think it's like Prokofiev, I mean, who's so specific on every articulation, and now the words that are there that you can share. I've always encouraged composers to write more, because again, once you're gone, no one's going to be able to know what exactly you were wanting. And I know that that can get over much with like Mahler or something, but it does help the musician. And the other thing that I've always asked for, which I know you know, is the story of the piece to be in the parts. That's never been the case before. It's always just been in the score, and the musicians don't see the score very often or read that, right? So if it's in the parts, we're the ones interpreting it, and that's completely unique. And it shouldn't be. You know, I think it's a really cool idea that we know what's happening in the parts. So
yeah, that's a really good point. To be honest, I hadn't thought about that, but you're right, to have the program notes, give some context so it's not so abstract. Yeah, that's a really good, I hadn't thought of that before.
Yeah, it's in our contract. So it's part of
okay.
So no, it's going to be great. I'm really looking forward to socially distanced. It's a good piece that all orchestras should be playing, because it can be socially distanced on stage and low enough string count for on a large stage. But yeah, I'm looking so forward to it next week. And our concert's the 5 o'clock on November 14th at ROCO.org and on our YouTube channel. But what do you have coming up? Is there other things? What are the projects coming up for you?
Yeah, so this piece is actually a co-commission with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra. So I'm resident with them for 3 years. So my next piece is actually for them. It's a piece for orchestra and chorus. So it's my first time bringing those two forces together. I wrote a piece for their chorus a cappella last year. So, and I've written for the orchestra. So this is an exciting opportunity to bring those two sound worlds together.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's going to be a sort of tone poem of sorts, and then sort of starting to dip my toes into opera too, as sort of an extension of that. So yeah, but
nice. We have some questions. We have a question. What's your favorite Beethoven symphony?
I think I'd have to go with the Pastoral Symphony. So
Nice.
Just to have music really evoke a sense of place.
Yes. Matthew Dane, who is our principal violist on here, he was saying the sextuplets are brisk. So,
they are, and sorry.
That's pretty good. You can do that. I believe in you. So, at least I'm not double tonguing or anything like that. There's no oboe on that, so we'll have to talk about that at some point.
Yeah.
But I think that's a big part of it. Yeah. So the other question is, if you have any questions in chat, just keep asking them. And how did you decide on the piano sonata that you did for it? And I know you were saying that's something that you immediately thought of, that you were just hearing it and it struck you that you should write something about it, or?
Yeah, the piece just popped into my head. And to begin with, I couldn't actually remember what the piece is. I just remembered those octaves. So then I got a copy of the score, and I'm not a pianist, but I sort of hacked my way through it.
Right.
So yeah, just from having heard it, you know, many times in the past, it was just sort of haunting there in the back of my mind. So it just seemed like a good opportunity. It's actually I've written 3 pieces this past season that are inspired by Beethoven as part of the 250th anniversary. So It's been an interesting little, you know, triptych of pieces. I wrote a string quartet for the Calidor quartet that's inspired by Beethoven's late quartets. and a piece for the Knights and the Orlando Philharmonic that's inspired by the Kreutzer Sonata, his epic work for violin and piano. So for each three of those pieces, I had the same sort of process of finding little kernels of ideas that I then developed through my own lens. So it's been really a good opportunity to really get to know some of these works really well over this past year. So I've been thankful for that opportunity.
So when you do this, do you really truly, do you feel like Beethoven is there as a, not a, well, a specter, let's just say it, is he as a specter over you as you're composing, or is it really the jumping off point for your own inspiration?
I'd say it's the jumping off point and just finding little moments that can be expanded upon. So I wonder too that, I mean, they do have a slightly Beethovenian sound to them, like Beethovenian. Is that
Beethoven. Of course it's a
that sounds wrong. But anyway, I think they have, you feel like a ghostly presence, I think, at moments of his work. But yeah, I mean, if I I'll pull up the score one more time just to show you the there's an appendix to the score that shows the quotations. Do you see the score again?
I do.
Yeah. So it's quite a lot. So here I take the rhythmic gesture.
Yes.
And actually that's the opening gesture. Then of course these octaves.
Nice.
So here I take this sort of staccato line. And like in this section, I take this inner voice. So it's not always the most obvious voice. And I expand upon that by looping it and layering. And well, let's see an example. This tune, it's so beautiful, but I sort of reimagine that. And let's see. And then this part from the rondo, which is just this triplet descending figure, which is so you know, defiant and really sense of closure, which I then use to close my piece. If I flick back, you here is that same figure, but obviously with a little more aggression, a different kind of character, but driving through to the end, which has quite a traditional end with these repeating the same note of the tonic 3 times. Yeah.
Nice. Well, we've been getting a couple more questions just about, number one, how you started as a composer and where that kind of has led you, but also any advice to nowadays composers, because there's a plethora of composers out there, but pathways are widely varied. So advice you would have, but also how you started.
Yeah, perhaps. Well, advice, I would say that you can learn so much through your friends. So if you're a student at a university, really get to know the musicians that are excited about new music and write pieces for them and get feedback, because the toolkit that you really need as a composer, well, the thing is, being a composer, there's so many things you have to learn: counterpoint, harmony, a history of technology, if that's part of your sound world. But really knowing the instruments well is really critical if you're writing for the orchestra. So it's really, if you can work one-on-one with musicians to know exactly with the flute and how is it in different ranges, what's very idiosyncratic, what's really awkward, like learning those different things for the instruments. So starting small, sometimes it's easier to want to jump in the dive into the deep end and write for orchestra, which is an incredibly exciting thing to do, but you really need to build up to that point so that you really have the tools to really say what it is you want to say with an orchestra piece. So that, and then also there's some wonderful resources, like you mentioned New Music USA. They have some grants for projects, and the ASCAP and BMI, they also have opportunities, and there are some wonderful programs with Earshot and American Composers Orchestra and Minnesota orchestras that have programs for emerging composers. I actually teach the Orchestra of St. Luke's has the De Gaetano Composition Institute. This is our 2nd year, and that's an opportunity for 4 emerging composers to write pieces for the orchestra. So yeah, so I'd recommend like finding out these different opportunities and working hard too. So
well, and also, and going even further back, the American Festival for the Arts, AFA, here in Houston has a high school program for composers as well. Just even how just dip your toe into it and just to begin. I think that's the good way. And I will say to musicians that are watching this to be careful what you show composers that you can do, because even if you can do a silly party trick with your instrument, it may not be one you want to do on stage at some point, because I showed Derek Bromell how I could play the oboe without a reed in it and buzz into it. And to this day, I've not lived that down. So I just, it's dangerous. But yeah, I think that's exciting. And like you said, it's really about being in relationships and dynamic relationships with people that are creative. And that's what comes. Now, you had all this time with Beethoven. And is there another white dead male that you want to delve into? Or is there another composer that you're really thinking about exploring relational pieces with or about?
I think too, Stravinsky, I would love to really get to know more of his work from the inside out. For me, Rite of the Spring, the Rite of Spring continues to be one of the most exciting pieces for orchestra, 100 years, more than 100 years on now. But my Stravinsky and Bach are perhaps two of my most influential classical composers. So I feel like I would never get bored going through their music, especially Bach. Any opportunity to get to know more of his music is a real gift. So perhaps that's something I would explore in the future.
Is there any popular composers or any rap or rock and roll or anything like that that influences what you do?
Well, I'm very influenced by folk music. I grew up, coming back to a question about how I started, I actually started composing when I was 7. Some friends of our family gave us a piano with some missing keys. So I immediately started writing pieces for myself and my friends to play without those keys. So it's always been about relationships with musicians and, writing for specific musicians and friends. And I didn't grow up in a classical music household, but there was always lots of like folk music, like Dylan and Pink Floyd and like Simon and Garfunkel, Dire Straits, all those bands. So for me, melody continues to be really important. And I find like folk traditions really inspiring. I'm a big fan of Rhiannon Giddens, the vocalist and banjo player. And I heard her recently on a Bang on a Can marathon, and just hearing her play the banjo and singing felt so just heartfelt and genuine, and just like it conveyed all this emotion just with 2 instruments, really quickly, and the text too. But that inspired. I've been taking banjo lessons for the last 4 months via Zoom. And yeah, so it's been that's been great to try, play a new instrument's been really inspiring. And perhaps that's a good thing with composing too. If you get a bit stuck, try learning a new instrument and see how that feels as well.
That's really great. Well, then you need to write for Steve Martin, I think, the banjo.
Amazing. He's so good.
I know. No, I think that's great. And I think that the more variety you have in your listening is fantastic. I love the Williams twins that listen the first time hearing. I mean, I go down a rabbit hole. I keep waiting for them to go into our listening room and hear something for the first time classical, or like Flight of the Bumblebee or something. But yeah, just new people exploring new things. But well, I'm thrilled that we're doing this piece, and I cannot wait that we're live streaming for free, and access is important to us, and the number one thing actually. So next Saturday, the 14th at 5 o'clock Central, we'll be doing your piece, and we will be having you jump in electronically to be able to witness some of our rehearsals. So we can't wait for that either. But thank you so much for sharing what you do with us, and we're thrilled that you're a part of the concert. So.
Thank you so much. See you all soon virtually.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.